But first, the full supine cowardice, the weak-willed idiocy, the jelly-brained determination of the Biden administration to throw over decades of American strategy, to say nothing of one of America's strongest allies, for no other reason than to gain tactical advantage in the November election. Well, that was put on display for the whole world to see over the past 24 or so hours. You see, after months of trying to manage Israel's response to the atrocities of October 7, and years of acting like a pal to both Tehran and Tel Aviv, the Biden administration decided this week it finally had to pick one side or the other. So, can you guess who Blundering Joe and his merry pack of swamp rats chose? Was it Israel? The thriving democracy that welcomes all faiths, treats women as equals, and frankly doesn't care what you get up to with whom in the bedroom? Or Iran, the theocratic dictatorship where women are whipped or worse for not properly covering their hair, and which makes a public sport of hanging gays and sexual minorities. Oh, and which also is, of course, the sponsor of Hamas. And because let's not forget that Iran, which was behind Hamas committing October 7th, because it wanted to derail the peace process between Israel and Sunni Arab nations, just as they worried about the rise of Tehran's evil influence around the world and the Middle East, and Hamas, which uses psychotically violent tactics as its levers against Israel. Well, given the two, who do you think Joe Biden sided with here? I mean, as Israel is on the verge of, it hopes, finally crushing Hamas and ending the outfit's reign of terror once and for all. As the saying goes, roll the tape.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah.
So let's get this straight here. If Israel wants to, pretty reasonably, if you ask me, use the threat of going into Rafah and the Gaza Strip to finish off Hamas as leverage in its negotiations, well, that's no good. Biden instead wants Israel, and has been pressuring them on this front for months, to sign a ceasefire that will give Hamas and its leadership the chance to regroup, rebuild, and launch missiles and terrorist attacks and Lord knows what heinous replays of October 7th without necessarily giving up any of the hostages who they have not yet murdered. Well, what Joe Biden has just done is, I think, they've given a gift to Hamas, but not just Hamas, but a gift to Iran that is even bigger than the billions of dollars in funds the Biden administration released for Tehran that were clearly used to help pay for October 7th. The New York Post summed it up really well. One word: betrayed. And that's a pretty good word for what happened. But Biden's behavior also sounds a lot like what Democrats fret about what Donald Trump would supposedly do if he becomes president again. You know, selling out America's closest allies and cozying up to dictators. Why, it's almost like when Trump was accused of encouraging Putin to do whatever the hell he wants in Europe, and everybody lost their ever-loving minds. Of course, that's not really what Trump said. He said Europe needed to pay its defense bills, but forget that. That's all just fevered leftist fantasy. The reality, the lived reality, to borrow a phrase, is that Joe Biden, the Democrat president of the United States, just said exactly that to Iran. Hey, mullahs, go do whatever the hell you want to Israel. They're just, you know, an ally we've had around since 1948 or something. So why? Why would he do this? What's the point? Oh, here's the thought. Maybe Joe Biden just discovered that he is actually also a fundamentalist Ayatollah, that he was raised in the Shiite madrasa, just like when he said he was raised in the black church, the Jewish shul, and the ethnic foods aisle of the Wilmington Price Chopper supermarket. No, I don't think so. I think what happened here is that Biden and his people looked at the poll numbers, looked at Israel, looked at the poll numbers again, and told the Jews, Mazel tov, you're on your own. The longer the conflict in Gaza drags out, you see, the worse it is for Joe Biden. And here are two big reasons why. Number one, the campus protests, which are still making news around the world and which now see young people who should be among the Democrats' most loyal voters calling the president Genocide Joe. How's that for gratitude for all those student loan cancellations, hey? Kids these days. Here's a little bit of a media mashup of commentators freaking out that these protests are doing a ton to help Trump.
The campus protests are playing out over there on the presidential campaign trail. Donald Trump trying to use the issue against President Biden.
When you look at these protests, these images, do you think to yourself, wow, this is a real in-kind contribution to Donald Trump?
The unrest is now threatening to become an election issue.
They're clearly trying to create echoes to 1968 and the anti-Vietnam War, anti-war protests.
The 1968 analogy does not bode too well for Democrats.
In 1968, Richard Nixon celebrated the non-demonstrators and was elected to the presidency. And the title of David Brooks' piece, Why the Protests Helped Trump.
And the other issue, of course, is the Muslim vote, particularly in key must-win states like Michigan, where Arab and Muslim communities are absolutely seething about anything that looks like support for the little Satan of Israel from the big Satan of the United States. Might want to turn down the heat on that melting pot. I think it's going to boil over. But this adds a whole nother dimension to this. You see, the quid pro quo Biden laid out in that CNN interview, do what I say, Israel, don't go into Rafah or I'll withhold aid because I need you to do what I say for my own political reasons. Well, again, that's also precisely what Biden accused Trump of doing, withholding aid to Ukraine unless they opened an investigation into Hunter Biden. Gosh. And even just 5 short years ago, Biden said that despite his opposition to settlements and his own problems with Bibi Netanyahu, the idea of cutting off military aid to Israel was preposterous.
But the idea that we would cut off military aid to an ally, our only true ally in the entire region, is absolutely preposterous. It's just beyond my comprehension. Anyone would do that.
Our only true ally in the region. Well, the saddest thing is that none of this politically will work. I mean, think about it. Once someone's calling you Genocide Joe, it's pretty hard to get their vote back. But it reveals just how low Biden and his people will stoop, selling out an ally when they are in the middle of trying to negotiate with Hamas for hostages of which 5 are believed to be Americans, by the way, while tipping the balance of power into Hamas's favor because there's a few votes in it? What message does that send to all of America's other allies? Honestly, Joe, how low can you go?